He's about 455 yards away. He's going to hit about a 2 iron, I think.
This is the School of Motion podcast. Come for the Mograph, stay for the puns.
That was something that was very important to me from the beginning. From my very first class, I wanted to make sure that I was delivering 100% content to my students because I hated the tutorials that were talking about their pets or what they ate for dinner that day, or I want them to get to the point. I never wanted a student to feel that way with my classes.
The world of online education is expanding at a pretty ridiculous pace. Back in my day, we only had Creative Cow, or if you were really brave, Mograph.net. But now you've got YouTube, School of Motion, Grayscale Gorilla, and larger sites like lynda.com, Udemy, and Skillshare. The opportunities for learning new skills are everywhere, and the opportunities for earning some extra income by teaching online are also growing rapidly. Our guest today is the man, the myth, Jake Bartlett. Jake is a fantastic motion designer who has made a name for himself on the Skillshare platform, creating a whole bunch of courses and earning a ton of fans along the way. Jake is also teaching a brand new course for us, Explainer Camp, which will be ready for the winter 2018 session. Jake is part of a new and exciting trend of motion designers who are actually able to pay their bills exclusively through teaching online. In this interview, we talk about Jake's path through the industry and how he ended up becoming such a successful online teacher. We also talk about Explainer Camp, which is a course unlike any other and something we are incredibly excited about. So that's it. Let's jump in. Jake Bartlett, buddy, it is awesome to have you on the School of Motion podcast. Thanks for doing this, man.
Awesome. Hey, man, thanks for having me. I feel like I walked in the back door down a dark alley. I don't belong here. What's going on?
That's the vibe that we try to, portray here at School of Motion. We want to be basically the drug dealers of the Mograph industry. So, Jake, I think a lot of people listening to this are going to have heard your name because you've kind of made a really good name for yourself on the Skillshare platform as an After Effects trainer. But I've gotten to know you over the past, several months, and you have a very interesting story about how you ended up in this industry. So I'm wondering if we could start just by talking a little bit about how you got into motion design.
Yeah, sure. It was pretty early age for me that I got into computers. I was homeschooled my whole life, so I was home all the time, obviously. I mean, I had friends and a social life, but the computer part of it, I had access to lots of software, which I'm assuming at this point in my life, it must have been pirated by somebody. I have two older brothers, but I got into Photoshop very early, probably 10 or 11. I was messing around with all the effects, and the twirl effect I remember being my favorite.
Classic.
But because I was exposed to that, and my oldest brother's 8 years older than me, he's also into design and 3D animation, so he was always bringing stuff home and showing me how to do fun things on the computer. One summer during his college, he brought back After Effects and Premiere, and we were just shooting some silly videos, and he showed me how to put lightsabers on them. And that was the defining moment for me of this is what I want to do.
Yep.
And so I just dove headfirst into After Effects, and eventually Video Copilot came along, and I was completely self-taught online, but that's how I got into it. And eventually I decided I wanted to be more animation-based rather than special effects. But yeah, Video Copilot, I mean, that's everybody's story, right?
I know. It's almost a cliche at this point. So what was the first Video Copilot tutorial you watched?
Yeah.
It must have been the lightsaber one. So
yeah.
So how did you end up getting your first job in the industry?
Yeah, that was also interesting because I went to this one-semester film program in Los Angeles called the Los Angeles Film Studies Center. And that was, my junior year. And I graduated a semester early, so I was out in January of college. And on my way to Los Angeles, I knew that's where I wanted to live after being out there for a while. And one of my friends that I was going to be moving in with on the drive out there, I'm from Michigan, so it was a long drive. He said that he caught wind that they needed an After Effects artist at the company that he was working at. And so I sent him my made-up reel that basically had Video Copilot tutorials and other things that I made up myself. And that ended up getting me my first job, which was actually the only full-time real job I ever had. It lasted almost 5 years before I decided to go freelance.
And
So
what
it
kind of
was-
stuff were you doing there?
I was doing all kinds of, I did all different types of roles. My first job was on a show called Who Knew for Yahoo News. It was purely After Effects, Kinetic text, and like cutout photos. And it was it was like a trivia show, kind of like on this day in history, the Big Mac was invented, and it was related to these 10 different things. And then at the end of the episode came back to the Big Mac. And that was a daily show. So every day, me and one other animator had to animate 45 seconds of content that would be posted the next day. And that, like I said, lasted a year and a half. So I got very fast at making stuff in After Effects over that year and a half. And then I kind of just established myself there, and I became like a jack of all trades because I knew how to design stuff because my minor was graphic design. So I was making pitch material. I was editing because I knew how to edit. So I was just tossed around all different kinds of projects at that company.
So you were sort of a Swiss Army knife at that point, doing a little bit of everything. It's interesting because, having seen a bunch of the work that you've done since then, and especially the work that you've been doing for us, which we're going to get to in a minute, you've kind of developed a little bit of a style, and it's kind of like illustrative and fun, and your animation skills have gotten really good. Did any of that develop at this gig, or was it mainly just your technical chops?
I would say it was more of technical chops because I never had any education in animation at all. Like I said, I was just self-taught online. So everything that I knew how to do, I found through YouTube or Video Copilot or whatever. I taught myself. I never felt like I knew what I was doing as an animator. Like I was looking at people like Jarek Nest, who did like that Crazy Enough piece when he was in school, and that blew my mind. And that was the moment where I knew like that's what I wanted to do, but I had no idea how I could ever do something that looked like that. And I watched that video at work. I specifically remember the moment when I saw that, and I was like, "This is compared to what I'm making. Like, I am crap. This is awful." But I think the usefulness of me being at that company to my boss and the producers I was working with was what kept me around for almost 5 years because I could get the job done. I was quick. I was reliable. So I just did whatever people asked me to, but in terms of like my artistic ability and especially in terms of animation, that job didn't really contribute much.
Yeah, I remember my first Jorge moment when I think I saw the same piece or I saw something he did for $1 and I realized I will never be that good. Everyone listening, you should never compare yourself to Jorge. And if you don't know who we're talking about, Jorge, he's got 4 names, but it's Jorge Estrada. He used to work at Giant Ant. He's freelance now. He's possibly the best After Effects animator out there right now, at least in the top 5 for sure.
Absolutely.
He's incredible. And I'm a big fan. So anyway, so you get into the industry, and it sounds like you kind of landed in the perfect spot. You were exposed to a lot of different things. You had to work really fast. So I'm sure nothing from that time period is on your reel. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah. But you got really fast, which is actually, I mean, I don't think it's like an underrated skill to have to be really fast at After Effects. I think people know that it's important, but I don't think they realize just how important it is. I worked on a TV show for a season and a half, and it was the same kind of thing. I had to, I'd have a day to make 14 animations. And you gotta, so you have to get fast, not just in terms of like knowing the hotkeys and being able to move around fast, but being able to come up with an idea and design it and execute it fast. And you kind of develop this bag of tricks. Like, well, I know that if I scale something from 0 to 110 and then down to 100 and I ease it like this, it's going to look good no matter what it is. I'm just going to do that over and over again.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are some of the tricks like that to get fast that you picked up during that time?
Oh, man. Well, I started making my own presets. Like, I'm sure everybody's aware of that, like, hinge swinging text effect that I think MK12 is the one who originally did that for a movie with Will Ferrell. But it just looks like, the text is swinging. I used that all the time in that first show that I was making at that company. And to animate that by hand every single time, like, it took way too long for a daily show. So I was like, how can I do this kind of an animation quicker, and that's when I learned about presets. So I just started making my own, like, these are my animations, but I can apply them to whatever I want. And I just had a whole library of presets.
That's awesome. And you're talking about the Stranger Than Fiction titles.
Yes, Stranger Than Fiction.
Yeah.
Yep. So presets were a big thing. Scripts, like there was a really, this was like 7 years ago now, but it was called like sequence layers. And I know that there's way more robust scripts now, but it just simply offset a selection of layers, the number of frames that you want them to.
Yep.
Efficiency, stuff like that. It was all kinds of just corner cutting, basically.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Back when I was on the show, background renderer for After Effects, that was like a big time saver. And now the script you're talking about now, there's one called Rift that I use all the time. That it's really, really powerful. Awesome. Okay, so then what happened from there? Did you, because now, and we'll get into this, but you actually pay your bills by teaching motion design far more than actually doing it, which is kind of unique in this industry. So what was the next step after that job?
Well, like I said, I was there for almost 5 years. So I had worked with lots of producers, and at that company, we had a different client every month. So we had different teams coming in every month, basically. So when a producer came in and out and they worked with me, sometimes they would like me and they want to pull me onto a job that they're doing it for somebody else. So my name basically just got passed around, and I started picking up side work. And this was probably 3 years into that career. And I just started working nights and weekends and enjoyed the extra income. And then at the same time, I discovered this website called Skillshare through my wife, who's a graphic designer, a hand letterer. And she found it because of the hand lettering course that was going to be released. And for those of you who don't know, Skillshare is just an online teaching platform, learning platform where you can, like, anyone can make a class and you can learn basically any kind of topic. There's probably a class on it. At the time, there were not nearly as many as there are now, but this one specific hand lettering class got my wife's attention, and she took it, and then she said, Jake, you should look at this and see if there's anything that you could potentially do for teaching, because she knew that I enjoyed teaching. Like, when I was in college and stuff, I enjoyed helping my friends, but I never thought that teaching was going to be like a reliable source of income, so I never pursued it. But she told me to check it out, and there were probably 3 After Effects classes on the platform at the time. And then, so I was interested, and I was like, maybe this is a chance to try teaching. But I kind of put it off until Skillshare ran this promotion, a teach challenge, where you just had to submit a class proposal, and they were going to pick their favorite, and whoever's their favorite was won a MacBook Air. So that was like, this is my shameless confession of that was my number one motivation into teaching on Skillshare, was I wanted to win a laptop. And I did.
That's amazing.
It was a big surprise to me. I thought there was going to be a lot of competition, and for all I know, there was. I never saw any other submissions, but I just wrote out this big long proposal for a full class on animating kinetic text, and I chose that because I was like, who am I to teach? Like, I know how to do stuff in After Effects, but I'm not like a professional animator. I don't feel like I have the credentials to be teaching, but I was like, if there's one thing I'm going to teach, it's going to be kinetic text, because I did that for like 3 years straight. So that's what I outlined my class after. They loved it, and they helped me produce it. And now, that class lived for like a year on its own. At the time, Skillshare was an a la carte model, so like you would pay for the classes you wanted to take, and I got to determine the pricing. Now it's a subscription based, just like Netflix, so you're paying a monthly subscription, you get access to everything.
Yep.
But yeah, after a year of that class, the enrollments had died down. I made probably $2,000 or $3,000 over a year, plus the laptop. So I was basically approaching it like it was nice while it lasted. I got a laptop out of it. Like, I'm not at all upset that people aren't enrolling it after a year. But on the day that I told my boss I was going to go freelance, that I was leaving the company, and this was because I had enough side work that my day job was actually taking away from it. On that same day, probably 20 minutes after I told him, I got an email from Skillshare asking me if I would be willing to make another class, and they offered me all kinds of support. They said they were going to start this new creators club with some of their top teachers, and they wanted me to be a part of it. And so it was really affirming that I left my job, and then suddenly they're like, hey, we want to make you a really successful teacher on Skillshare. So I had a lot of support from them, but that's when I decided that I was going to start trying to teach more regularly. And I made my second class, which ended up doubling my following in a month. And that was the moment that I was like, okay, I think this might be a valuable source of income and something worth pursuing. So yeah, since then I think I've got over 20 classes now, and it's literally become my largest source of income. And on top of that, I got my wife to start teaching on it as well, because she's, very talented designer, hand letterer. So she does Photoshop and lettering, and teaching has just become a really big part of my family.
That's amazing, man. And I want to dig into you brought up a whole bunch of things there. I kind of want to unpack, but I want to first, let's start with, at the time, because Skillshare was on my radar too, obviously, and Udemy, and there's other ones out there. But I'm wondering, what about Skillshare attracted you to the platform? Was it literally just the opportunity to win a MacBook Air, or was there something about them that, drew you in, as opposed to lynda.com or Digital Tutors or Udemy, or even just making tutorials on YouTube? Yeah.
So my initial attraction to Skillshare was I did enroll in one of those After Effects classes, and it was on character animation. And I was just very impressed with the teacher's ability to communicate. Like everyone, has watched horrible YouTube tutorials where they're way more concerned with you smashing the like button than actually learning anything. So it was just very well thought out, very well presented, and so I really liked that about it. Obviously, the teacher had nothing to do with Skillshare, but the idea that Skillshare had attracted teachers who were presenting quality material, that was attractive to me. Part of it was that I just wasn't really aware of other online learning platforms. And like I said, I wasn't really looking for them. My wife just said, you should check this out. So I did. So I wasn't even aware of Udemy. I knew about Lynda, but I didn't think that was a platform that I could just approach and say, hey, I want to teach for you. And then the other part of it is literally the challenge of winning the MacBook Air. That was, I feel terrible saying it, but that was literally the motivating factor that made me actually go through with making my first class.
That's hysterical. So you also mentioned that, you felt some imposter syndrome. You said, who am I to teach? I'm not Jorge. I can't animate like that. He should be making classes, which he has now finally.
Yeah.
So do you still, after having made, a couple dozen classes and now you're working on a really big class for School of Motion, has that imposter syndrome gone away to some extent, or do you still feel it?
It depends on what I'm teaching, but it has definitely gone away. I think with that first class, I was just so terrified that people are going to be paying me to take this class, and what if they don't like it?
Right.
And the response was overwhelmingly positive, so that went away very quickly. But I was just terrified that why am I selling somebody something when I have absolutely no credentials? I've never taught before. I don't really have much to show for what I'm trying to teach, other than just having the experience of working at a production company in Hollywood. That was basically the extent of my credentials. So, but like I said, once I saw the students' responses, and Skillshare is also a project-based platform, so they can make things and post them. When I started seeing those projects come in and how much fun the students were having, that was super encouraging and made me much more open to teaching more classes, for sure.
That's awesome. I can totally relate to that too. I mean, that is still my favorite part of our classes at School of Motion, is seeing the student work come in. Especially things that the students have designed all by themselves, that came from their brain, and that is the best part. So we're gonna link to your Skillshare profile. Everyone can go check it out. And you have a huge number of classes, and the variety is crazy. And I'm wondering, how do you come up with what you're going to teach? The first thing you taught was what you thought you knew really well, Kinetic type. And I think you also got lucky that probably when you taught that class was the height of the lyric video, the Kinetic type video.
Absolutely.
And it worked out well. But do you how much of the equation is, well, I think I can sell a lot of this, versus I think that this is what students need to learn to be able to, be a professional in the industry?
Right. There are a lot of different types of classes basically in my head. So I start by picking out what kind of class I want to teach. The first like year of teaching, I knew that I was going to need a fundamental, something that was going to give beginners who've never opened After Effects before a quick intro into After Effects and animation. So I made a class like that. But then I also like picked another topic, like I did kinetic text, but I also knew that I really liked animating with shape layers. And from my own experience online, I felt like at the time, almost no one was using shape layers. They were all just making solids and masking them and animating them that way. So I was like, I'm going to do a class that covers every single thing you could possibly know about shape layers. And then I came up with another type of class that was, I call them a looks class, where it's way more of a traditional tutorial where you're learning how to apply an effect or a style to a graphic. So the knit sweater look in After Effects is one of them that I did, where whatever you put into this pre-comp, all of these effects are built on top of it, and it comes out looking like it was a knit, holiday sweater. So I start by picking out what kind of class I want to teach, what I think, like I look at what was the last class I taught maybe, and then say, do I want to do another one like that, or should I go in a different direction? But another factor is just really what I'm excited about, because that knit sweater class, that was something that I just came up with in like the beginning of December of last year. I was in the Christmas mood, and I was like, you know what? I want to make this effect, and this would be a perfect Skillshare class. So I just did it in a couple of weeks.
Let me ask you something about that, Jake. So you're getting me thinking here. So Skillshare currently, and they may change because they've changed in the past, but it's a subscription-based service, right? You pay, $8 a month, $10 a month, something like that. It's pretty inexpensive, and you get access to every class. But initially, they weren't like that. They were like School of Motion, right? Our classes are a la carte. You buy the class, you take that session, and then you keep the class, but you don't get all the other classes. And I'm wondering if that affects your decision to make a tutorial or a class like that, right? If Skillshare was an a la carte model still, and people had to literally fork over $20, $25 to learn how to make something look like a knit sweater, versus it's an interesting thing they're already going to get because they have the subscription, and if enough people watch it, you get paid. Does the revenue model actually affect those decisions a little bit?
Yeah, I absolutely think it does, because I determined my costs at the beginning, and then they switched to subscription, and then it was determined by the number of enrollments I got. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, length didn't matter. It was just quantity. I wanted to make as many classes as I possibly could as quickly as I could and get as many people to enroll in them. Then some teachers got smart, and they realized, well, if we just start like making these Facebook groups and make these crappy classes and then share enrollments, we'll make money. So Skillshare caught on to that, and they cracked down on it, and they implemented some ways of getting rid of that. And now it's no longer based on your enrollments, how much I get paid. It's based on how many minutes are watched. So over the few years that I've been teaching on Skillshare, my motivation for teaching specific types of classes has changed. In my opinion, at least, it all just comes down to the quality of the teaching. It doesn't matter how I'm getting paid. My class is going to be successful based on if the students are actually getting something out of it and if they're enjoying it. So that's how I've always approached it. Even on those simple, like the knit sweater tutorial, I'm teaching you to do a very specific look, but I'm also teaching you a lot about specific effects and how to approach pre-comps and making things, what's the word? Where you put something in and then it spits it out looking like the sweater. I can't think of the word. Andrew Kramer uses this term all the time, and I'm drawing a blank. But
maybe if you try speaking like Andrew Kramer, and then it'll come to you. But essentially, like you have a source and you put it in the right place and it comes out the other end.
Right. There's like 10 layers of pre-comps, and whatever you put in the main comp at the end, everything is based on that original comp.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's like a reference layer.
Yeah. Anyway, I try with any of my classes, I'm trying to teach you things within those tutorials. I'm not just giving you a recipe for how to make a knit sweater. I'm trying to teach you everything you could possibly learn along the way that you could apply to anything.
That, it's interesting. When I started making tutorials for School of Motion, that was I almost said those exact words, I think. In sort of having my inner monologue, why am I doing this? It's because I feel like that's where the value is. And it's really smart that you did that. The hook is learn how to make a knit sweater, but the actual meat of it is you're learning about pre-comps, you're learning about probably using like the displacement effect and reference layers and luminance and all this kind of stuff. So you're you're a very good teacher. A lot of people have said this to me when you started making content for us. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you got Jake. He's so great." You are also a really good motion designer. You've got a really good sense of design. You've got this great kind of illustrative kind of style, and you're a great animator. So you could do really well as a freelance motion designer. I think you're good enough to go get hired at a studio if you wanted to. So why not just do that? Like, why do you want to teach now as opposed to do?
And you're making me blush over here. Well, so here's the way that I see it. At the beginning, I was freelancing, and I saw teaching as kind of like supplemental income. At the beginning, I wasn't making enough to live off of. So I just saw it as bonus income. I was going to try and make a class a month. But my main income was coming from freelance. I quit my job, so I said yes to absolutely every job that I possibly could find, so that I knew that, my wife had just gotten pregnant when I quit too. So we were preparing over the next 9 months to have our first child.
Oh boy.
So I wanted to be secure. So I did that work, and my goal with quitting my job was to have more time to be with my wife. And I ended up, because I said yes to everything, I ended up working weekends, which was something I didn't want to do anymore. I was already doing that. I quit my job so I wouldn't have to, but I just didn't know how to say no at that beginning part of my freelance career. And over that first year of freelancing, I learned a lot about how to deal with clients, how to say no, and what I wanted to do with my career. And as my Skillshare audience built, I realized, like, on Skillshare, I'm in charge of everything that I do. There's no approval process, no client to make happy. I just make what I think's interesting to me and what I think people are going to like, and then I get paid for it. It's kind of an insane concept. Like, I never thought that teaching would be something that could provide income like that. But once I started building a big enough audience, I was making a couple $1,000s a month, and I was like, this might actually be better than freelancing. And over the last 3 years, it's just slowly become this, like, basically a balance between freelance and teaching. And the teaching side just kept getting heavier and heavier, and I wasn't leaning on the freelancing anymore. And now here I am. Basically it all comes down to, I enjoy making stuff that I am excited about working on and not having to answer to anyone. Like, as adolescent as that sounds, really, I basically just want to have fun. And that's what's led me to becoming pretty much full-time teaching.
Yeah, so you brought up, this makes me think of two things I kind of want to point out to people listening, because I all of this, I'm nodding my head, like, I also teach for a living, and I intuitively get what you're saying, but I just want to spell it out for everybody. So, yeah. So one, and this is, I think what's unique about your situation is that you're pretty young to be having all of these realizations, Jake. So how old are you right now?
I'm turning 29 tomorrow.
Turning 29. Okay. So and you have a almost 3-year-old son, correct?
Almost 2.
Almost 2. Okay, cool. So
yep.
Jake and I both have little boys named Elliot. Pretty close in age, by the way. So all right. So you're 27 or 26, I'm guessing, when your wife got pregnant, and you're thinking, okay, like, why am I working? Am I working because, as some motion designers feel, we love doing this and we want to have national clients and get on Motionographer and get recognized and become, quote, like, successful Mograph artists, or do I want to spend more time with my family? That's a place I got to in my 30s. You got there a little bit earlier, and teaching is just a great way to do that. But you also arrived on the teaching scene at a really interesting time where, if you had come in 5 years earlier, there would not have been a way for you to do what you're doing. The whole idea that teachers now, talented ones that are good at teaching, can actually pay their bills by making essentially, like, polished tutorials. That's madness, right? And
yeah.
And the idea that you can make way more as a teacher than you can as a doer. It's kind of flipping the whole thing on its head. So everyone listening, I know there's, I've gotten tons of emails from people who have asked about teaching, because deep down, a lot of artists, I think, in the back of their head, they're like, I want to do this until I'm burnt out, and then I want to teach. I think Jake and I are both proof that teaching actually it's not it's not the low end of the equation anymore in terms of income, even in terms of creative possibility, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it too, because I quit my job because I wanted to have a lifestyle where I got to be with my wife all the time. And when I started teaching and saw that that was a viable source of income, I was like, well, I want to start really pursuing that, because not only will I get to be with my wife all the time, but if I decide I want to take a 3-month vacation, no one's going to stop me. I don't have to answer to anyone. So yeah, that was the appeal for sure.
That's amazing. So at what point were you able to fully pay your bills with teaching? Like, how long did it take you to get to that point?
I'd say when my wife started teaching, which was like a year and a half into me teaching on Skillshare is when I got her to start. Because when she started teaching, Photoshop was her category, and the illustration design topic on Skillshare was way, way bigger than After Effects. So she became very successful a lot quicker than I did. Like in her first 2 weeks of her first class, she got 1,000 enrollments,
wow,
which is something I would be lucky to do in a month with a new class. So her classes rose pretty quickly as well, and that opened up lots of possibilities for her. So once we started both having this supplemental income, this residual income, that's what's so cool about teaching as well, is that I'm doing all this work up front, and then I'm basically just checking in with students as they have questions or they need critique. But it was producing all this income. And I'd say, yeah, that when she started teaching is when it really became like, I think we can handle paying our bills and just live in the way that we want to, as long as we keep making classes.
That's so great. So, you know, I've seen some of your Skillshare stuff. You've made content for us, and now you're making a class for us. And I've seen how that's going. And you do actually make the whole teaching thing look fairly easy. And I think good teachers, that's their gift, is the ability to just, you know, talk about information, explain it in a way that's relatable, and it looks effortless. Was it always like that for you? Like, have you ever had to consciously work on certain things, like, all right, I need to stop saying or I need to come up with better metaphors to make things easier? Or has it just always been kind of in you to teach?
Well, like I said, I mean, I always enjoyed explaining things to people. Like, because I learned Photoshop so early, I knew how to do all these crazy effects when I was in high school, and I had friends who were like, how in the world did you do this? And I just enjoyed being able to explain to them and show them how to do fun things. So maybe that's what got me into teaching, or at least better at being able to explain things, because I did it with people in person like that. But my dirty little secret, which everybody's going to find out now, I'm not well at, you can tell I'm stumbling over my own words. What I'm trying to say is I'm not that good at speaking. Like, I have a really hard time formulating my thoughts into words. And so on my first class, and honestly, on all of my Skillshare classes, you would not believe the number of edits that I have in all of my recordings. Nothing is done like in a one-take kind of scenario.
Right.
I literally sit there and I think about, what am I trying to explain? And then I say that explanation over and over and over until I'm 100% happy with the way that I delivered the line and the way that it was worded. And sometimes individual sentences have edits in them, and I splice together the first half of this one and the second half of that one. I mean, the editing process of all of my classes is way longer than the production. And that was something that was very important to me from the beginning. From my very first class, I wanted to make sure that I was delivering 100% content to my students, because I hated the tutorials that were talking about their pets or what they ate for dinner that day, or like, just, I want them to get to the point. I never wanted a student to feel that way with my classes. So that was my approach. I just wanted to make sure 100% content, that it was explained as precisely and clearly as I possibly could. And that's how I've approached every single thing I've taught since then. It gets a little bit more difficult when I'm on camera, obviously, because I don't want to have 1,000 edits and jump cuts. But that just means it takes longer, because I'm basically rehearsing and re-recording that group of lines instead of a single line.
Yeah, I think that might be the biggest advantage, I think, about online learning as opposed to going to a class in person, is that you have that luxury of being able to edit the content and make it the best version of that class that you can. You know, in addition to being able to have Jake, who's a great teacher, do that, and then you don't need like 1,000-seat, you know, theater to have Jake teach you. You just need, you know, the Wi-Fi at Starbucks.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some other things about teaching that, you know, surprised you or that you learned as you started diving into this?
Well, I think what surprised me the most was how students received it, because like I said, I was terrified that people were just going to hate it and that they were going to feel like they got gypped out of the $18 they paid for my class. And I got the opposite response. People really liked it. And that wasn't something I expected. I didn't like going back to the laptop. That's why I did it. So once I won the laptop and they're like, okay, you have to make the class. I was like, crap. Like, what if people don't like it? But the response was great. And students really liked it. And I started building a following, and people were asking me, when are you going to release your next class? And I started asking, well, what do you want to learn? And I got 20 ideas. Like, people really affirmed that they enjoyed learning from me, and that was just incredibly encouraging. So getting over that imposter syndrome was a big learning experience that I took away from teaching. But another crazy part about teaching is that, let's say you wanted to make a neon sign in After Effects. That's a class that I teach as well, but I'll just use it as an example. If you wanted to make a neon sign, you'll probably mess around in After Effects until you get something that looks like a neon sign. But if I want to teach you how to make a neon sign, I want to make sure that I am teaching it in the absolute most efficient, precisely organized way possible. I want to make sure that if you take this, you're going to know from point A to point Z, like exactly how to make it and to do it in a controllable way that's really easy to edit and easy to look at and easy to understand. So it makes you think about things in a way that you wouldn't if you were just making it for yourself. And I think that made me become a better explainer, basically. I was able to think through things much more detailed and come up with efficiencies that I wouldn't have if I was just making a project for a client. And the expressions lessons that I made for School of Motion, another dirty little secret. I knew very little about expressions before teaching those. I forced myself to learn how to make that tapered stroke work through teaching it. Like the demo that I'm pretty sure you saw in the alumni group was so like hacky, the way that I had it set up, and it's embarrassing to look back at the way that I had it set up. It functioned, but it was terrible coding, and the expressions were just ugly. So I learned so much about expressions because I knew that I was going to have to teach it. And oh man, talk about imposter syndrome, moving from Skillshare to School of Motion, a website where I went to on a regular basis to learn. I mean, when I got your email, Joey, from asking me if I wanted to teach, that was like, I was in heaven. Like, I couldn't believe that you were reaching out to me. So I knew, like, this has to be perfect. There will be no mistakes, and I have to make sure that I know exactly what I'm doing is the best way to do it. It makes you push yourself to basically be better.
Well, little did you know what you were signing up for when you agreed to do this thing. You know, it's funny. You know what you just said. It's exactly what Nick from Grayscale Gorilla used to say all the time, which is like, you know, he's teaching as he's learning. And, you know, I think if you're starting out and you're thinking of teaching, it almost feels like you're cheating. Like, well, I can't teach that. I don't even know it. And yeah, I could learn it and then teach it. But I feel like, you know, it almost feels like cheating. Like, shouldn't there be some window of time where I learned it and then I waited a year and then I could teach it because now I've known it for a year. And in reality, you know, there's I don't know where this comes from, but I've heard this saying, if you really want to learn something, teach it. I think you learn more from teaching something than you can by being taught it, ironically.
Yeah.
So
I think so too.
So we've been sort of alluding to the fact that you are teaching a class for us. So Jake has made some tutorials for us. There's content on the site that he's authored for us. But Jake is actually, as of this recording, in the process of creating a brand new School of Motion class with us. So Jake, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about this class?
Yeah, man, this has been an amazing project. It's called Explainer Camp, and I've pretty much been working on it with you all year, but it's going to be a project-based course for School of Motion, and it's going to cover basically the entire production process of making an explainer video. And we even have a theme song that B. Grandinetti wrote, and it's awesome. You have to hear it. But in it, we say that we go from script to final render, and that's true. Like I'm as the teacher, I'm going to have a client, and I get a script from them and a brief, and over the course of the entire class, it's going to be me making my explainer video, from coming up with a budget and a schedule and sketching thumbnails and concepting all the way through the animation to the very final render with sound design and everything. And as students, you're going to have your own client, and you're going to be following along with me. And as I'm teaching you, you're going to be implementing what I'm teaching, and you'll have that one project throughout the entire course. And by the end of it, you're going to have a completed professional-looking explainer video that you can showcase in your portfolio or your demo reel, and it will be a finished piece.
Yeah, you did a great job of explaining it. So, one of the biggest kind of tenets of our courses at School of Motion is we want to make them real world applicable as much as possible. And this is the first course where we really have just gone crazy trying to simulate a real world experience as much as possible. We've got a fake client. We've got, we actually recorded the initial phone call with the client, and then you kind of break it down, so students can learn strategies to deflect, like you should never talk about budget on the first call, things like that. It's been so fun to make this with you, and I think people are really going to get a kick out of it. And I think we may actually have to play the song on this podcast episode.
Yeah.
We'll edit it in. But let me ask you this. So, I'm super excited about this course, obviously, as I know you are. But what is the hole in the education market that this class is filling? Like, why did you think that this is the class that you should make?
Well, I think that with a lot of classes, even on School of Motion, there's lots of fundamental courses, and those are super important, and that's what drew me to School of Motion in the first place, because I didn't have an education in animation principles, and I never learned how to do character animation. So those are extremely important courses. But a project-based course like this, where we're actually doing client simulation and you're getting to see phone calls and email conversations going back and forth, that's something that I've never seen before online, being taught how to handle client interaction and how to come up with a budget and things like that. Part of the process of making an explainer video that you probably were never educated in. We're approaching this course as you know how to animate, you know the fundamentals, you know how you might have even made explainer videos before. It's not going to be something that's brand new to you, but the rest of the process of basically being able to handle a client and knowing how to present things, how to word things, I haven't seen that anywhere online before, and I think that this is going to be a really exciting course to be able to present that material to students.
Yeah, I think it'll, like a lot of times, I think most of the time in this industry, you really learn the most once you're out in it doing, right? So you can go to school and you can take School of Motion classes, and I think our students do learn a lot in them and really useful stuff. But then they go out and they get a client and they're doing a client job, and in doing that client job, you learn 10 times as much because the pressure's on, and it's your ass on the line, and there's curveballs being thrown. It's not as controlled, and that's, I think, the strongest part about this class is it lets you do all of that without having to go find a client.
Exactly.
You basically sign up, and like all of our sort of interactive classes, we have teaching assistants that critique your work, they critique your treatment, they critique your animatic, they critique your designs, your style frames, and then you basically animate and produce a finished thing, and you pick music and all this kind of stuff. We actually just the other day recorded a voiceover session with a great VO artist for the spot that Jake produces as part of this class, and we recorded the entire session, and that's part of the class. You can actually hear how we directed the talent. We really tried to make it totally comprehensive, and I think it's going to be really fun too to go through it. So, Jake, you've you've created content for Skillshare, and now you've created content for School of Motion, and we're two very different companies. And I'm curious, just if you could talk a little bit about what you've seen, because I've only created content for School of Motion. I don't know what it's like to create for another company. What are some of the different, like, I guess, learning options that are out there, and how do they differ? Like, how does a Skillshare class differ from a School of Motion class, and anything else you've seen out there? What are the options for students looking to learn?
Yeah, well, I think it's completely based on the platform that it's presented on, because there's incentives for teachers to teach on different websites. On Skillshare, from a business standpoint, my goal is to get as many minutes watched as possible. And the way that I'm doing that is by making content that I think people are going to want to watch. So that I found great success through Skillshare in that way. Because they pay me by the minute watched and I'm making content that people are watching, that works for me. On YouTube, that you can find amazing After Effects, Cinema 4D tutorials, all kinds of stuff like that on YouTube, and there's tons of crap. I mean, we've all seen it. You just have to basically search until you find a good channel. But I think from a YouTuber's perspective, the incentive or their motivation is just to get as many viewers as possible, get as many subscribers. I've never tried to teach through YouTube. I don't know how effective the revenue would be for that, but I think that the motivation is very different. So the content is going to be curated towards that type of a viewer, basically somebody who's going to subscribe to the channel and want to see probably consistent, regular content. And I'm assuming that everybody listening to this podcast knows School of Motion. There's tons of free content on the website, and then there's amazing courses that you can pay for that are super in depth. And the amount of work that goes into one of those courses is 100 times what goes into a Skillshare class or a YouTube video. So, there are so many different places like Lynda, and we talked about Udemy. I think you kind of just need to do a little looking around and seeing what you want to learn. In my opinion, like, Skillshare has been an awesome place because you do get access to everything without it having to cost you anything more. So you can jump around from one teacher to another, and you're not really going to be out anything if the teacher you land on doesn't deliver. Same thing for YouTube. That's not going to cost you anything. And I think School of Motion speaks for itself at this point. The track record is pretty good with your courses. So I don't know, Joey, where am I going with this? Like, I'm not answering your question.
Well, you're making me think, because this is something, I kind of exist in this bubble where, like, I don't really. I pay attention, of course, to YouTube and Skillshare and all of this. And honestly, I'm saying this completely truthfully, I don't see any of them as competitors.
Right.
Even Mograph Mentor, who I guess would be like the closest thing to a competitor. Mike and I are, like, I would say we're buddies. Like, we're on very good terms, and we share information with each other, and we've hung out a couple of times. We've hung out at Blend, and we've talked online a bunch. And my mentality is that this is not a zero-sum game, this online learning thing. And, I love it. Like, everyone listening, go to Skillshare, like, sign up for Jake's classes. And I think the thing that you're making me realize is that the content that you're going to find and the value behind it, it's all going to depend on that company's, like, key metric that they're looking at, right? So you said Skillshare, it's minutes watched. So you're incentivized to make videos that will keep people watching, which is actually a pretty good metric, I think. Because then, you can make an hour-long video, and if it's good, you can pack that thing with content.
Right.
Whereas on YouTube, it's kind of a combination of the number of views you've gotten and the number of minutes watched. And so you're incentivized to make shorter videos that kind of jump right in. And so if you're trying to teach something like how to approach, follow through in After Effects, well, that's not really a 5-minute video, And so certain platforms are going to cater to making it entertaining and keeping you there for 5 minutes. That's not our metric. Our metric is, like, what are the reviews at the end of the course?
Yeah.
That's really what we look at the most. That's awesome, man. Well, I can't wait till this course comes out. So the last question I have for you, and by the way, thank you for, like, being so open about, like, your experiences on Skillshare, on School of Motion. I hope more and more people get into the online teaching thing. Do you think that teaching has made you not just a better teacher, but also a better artist? Has your work improved as you started teaching? And do you think that this could actually be a strategy for people who want to get better to like try and make tutorials?
Hands down, yes. Like, absolutely. I mean, in the same way that it pushes you to make things or explain things better, you're looking, like I said, I was always looking for doing things the best way. And most of the time that turned into me making things that looked better. And yeah, the simple answer is yes. Teaching is such a good way of becoming a better artist. And I would like to think that's what has increased the quality of my work over the last couple of years, for sure.
Awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much for hanging out. Explainer Camp is going to be unleashed onto the world very, very shortly, if not already by the time you're listening to this. And yeah, you'll be hearing more from Jake if you take that class.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joey.
Check out Explainer Camp on our courses page, schoolofmotion.com/courses, and check out Jake's other classes at Skillshare. I have to say that one of the most exciting things that I've seen in the past 2 to 4 years is the explosion of online resources to learn just about anything. And with that explosion also comes a ton of opportunity for artists who are looking to build a little passive income. We're always looking for new instructors to work on courses with us. So if you've got the teaching bug, please reach out to us at team@schoolofmotion.com and let us know what you'd like to teach. And vice versa, also reach out and tell us what you'd like to learn. We plan on filling as many holes in the Mograph training department as possible. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you got inspired by Jake, and I really hope to see you around School of Motion very soon. Take care.